Hey guys, do you know someone considering renting their property as an Airbnb? I have worked with Rental Advisor for over a decade, and Rental Advisor provides free rental projections to prospective owners, realtors, and investors for any property in the US. So if you know someone considering getting into the vacation rental industry, have them email management@myrentaladvisor.com to get their free revenue projections. So recently, after having several anti-Mormon accounts on Twitter say that Brigham Young was a supporter of slavery, I issued a challenge for someone to debate me on that very subject. Eventually, I had someone who wishes to remain anonymous, but who goes by Darth Modello on Twitter, accept the challenge. And so we set up a Twitter space where we had the following formal debate. The format that we agreed upon was opening statements, rebuttals, cross-examinations, and closing statements. Feel free to leave a comment with your thoughts. I hope you enjoy the debate. Well, then I guess, would you like me to start your timer here for the opening statement?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Perfect. All right, I will start your time now.
Cool. Well, Jacob, thanks for setting this up. I appreciate you having me on. I know that we've kind of been talking about this for a little while. You don't know me from Adam, so I could understand if you have some trepidation about having this conversation. But I think it's actually going to be really good. So the topic, of course, is did Brigham Young support slavery? And you've probably seen a few people have reached out or have added tweets to your announcement earlier, and kind of said, hey, this is a slam dunk issue. Brigham Young obviously supported slavery. I think, just to start with, to add some context, I think it's important. I think Brigham Young gave a speech before the legislature of Utah in 1852, approximately, I think. And it was all about the support of slavery for Utah as a state. I think at that time, I think that there was some that was kind of, I think that the state of Deseret had just been dissolved, and they were kind of going through some political machinations and those types of things. And so he gave a speech at that time that was it was pretty emphatic. I think that he really went out of his way to make sure that there was no question about whether or not he supported slavery. And so I think initially when this topic came up, I felt like, hey, this is a slam dunk topic, and I suspect, Jacob, that you probably understand everything I'm saying, and that's. And maybe I don't imagine that you're going to try to argue that Brigham Young never gave that speech, or some of the he didn't say. But I think maybe more importantly is to talk about why that's an important issue, and maybe why it matters to me. I think that there's plenty of support for that. I think people have linked to his speech. I think he says very clearly that. To set the record straight, I believe in slavery. I think, but maybe two or three things that I think are really relevant or important related to that. I think number one, Brigham Young, his statement in that speech effectively was that, from his theological perspective, he feels like, all people, all children of God are in essence slaves. He uses the term servants. And I think, Paul says something similar to that. He says, hey, I'm a slave, I'm a servant. And so Brigham kind of chimes in on that. But then he also says there's some people slaves. And so I think that what's relevant there is I think that it really does kind of set the stage for the way that for Brigham, or the brethren, if you will, see.
You broke up there. You broke up there for just a second. If you want to go back just a minute, I'll give you a little bit extra time. But that last statement that you had kind of broke up. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Am I coming through, Jacob?
Yeah, you're coming through now. You just had a few issues. I'm just going to stop the timer for a minute to make sure we have that sorted out. Do you have a Bluetooth on or anything like that?
Yeah, I do. Hold on one sec.
Yeah, maybe switching off of that might help.
How are we doing now? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you great now. So I'll go back to you were talking about how Paul said that we're all servants,
Yeah.
but then you kind of talked about how Brigham Young went off that. So I'll start the timer again now, and you can kind of riff off that point.
Great. So I think that, as saying Brigham in that speech, that's kind of what he's getting at is there are servants, and then there are servants of servants, and so it's very understandable. I think most people that have history of the church probably would say, yeah, I get that. That makes some sense. But I think what's difficult though is Brigham clearly takes that position that he believes slavery is correct, and that and he also goes on to describe that the curse of Ham and that kind of thing, and the curse of Cain. And so I think that for me, what's difficult about that particular issue is that the consistency, I think, with part of what I really like about I'm not a practicing member anymore. But there are a lot of things I really respect about the church, and one of the things I really respect about the church is the value that the church places on people. Particularly, the concept of people are children of God, people have free agency. And so I think that Brigham's position on this is just totally inconsistent with the church, and the church's underlying theology of the value of human beings. And so I think that that's an issue. I think the other thing that's really important about this conversation, probably, can you still hear me okay?
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
coming in
Okay.
clear.
Great. I think the other underlying issue I think with this is I think that this is one of those situations that's really cut and dry. I think that the facts of the matter are cut and dry. I think it's really clear that Brigham definitely supported this. But I think that and I think that we see this frequently is if we talk about the Exmo community and that type of thing. One of the large complaints about the Exmo from the Exmo community is that. I think often people feel like maybe they get gaslit a little bit. I think that I'm not necessarily trying to defend everything that the Exmo community does, but I think that there are certain cases in which maybe certain issues are dismissed when in fact they're pretty straightforward. Brigham Young did support slavery. I think for myself, some of the things that I had concerns about related to Joseph Smith and wives and those types of things. Those were all pretty straightforward, but it's disheartening sometimes, I think, when there's mental gymnastics or people try to argue and say that maybe just some of those things aren't understood. And I'm not trying to necessarily argue that, hey, the church is not true if Brigham Young supported slavery. That's not true, and I can understand that maybe that's the position that some people would take. They would say, hey, we need to defend this to the teeth because if this in fact happened, maybe it calls into question whether or not he could be a prophet. But I think that it's important, for the church, for everybody, just to acknowledge the things that really are factual. And so that's another underlying issue. I think that I have kind of with it. But then maybe the third issue would be that I think the church's position on considering everyone servants I think that that's telling. And I think that in some cases that really is that can be the perspective of the brethren. And I think that that's something that needs to be understood by people. That perhaps the way Brigham Young saw the saints or thought of everyone wasn't necessarily the same. There might be a pretty strong case for saying that in some ways that the people that are part of the beehive, the drones of the beehive are resources. Um, and so I think that in this context, I think it is a little bit revealing of kind of that fact. And again, I'm not necessarily saying that that's a reason why the church shouldn't exist or anything like that, but I think that that's a very real thing. And so for me, I think that what's really important, and I think on both sides, whether people are active members or no longer practicing, I think that objectivity and fairness is pretty important. I think that there's a lot of great things about the church, and I think there's a lot of
One
great
minute.
things in the ex-Mormon community. And I think that I think we all probably are going to grow a lot more and end up in a much better place if we can communicate kind of fairly and clearly on some of these things. How am I doing on time,
Awesome.
Jacob?
You got about 30 more seconds if you want it. I'm sorry. Yeah, you have about 30 seconds left. I stopped the timer here to give you an additional 30 seconds here to wrap that up.
Okay.
So, uh, So here, I'll go ahead and start the timer again.
Great.
Go
I
ahead.
appreciate that. But I think those are my key points. I think number one, I think that it really did happen. I think Brigham Young did support slavery. Brigham Young probably in large part was a product of his time. I'm not sure that means that he's somebody that should be totally thrown out. I think Abraham Lincoln supported slavery in a large part, and he could definitely he would be canceled in a second by today's standards. So I think that that's essentially my position.
Very cool. All right. I'll go ahead and stop the time. Well, thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start the timer, and then I will begin. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for doing this debate. I can already tell that you are a good debate partner that I'm going to enjoy actually interacting with. Despite obviously on Twitter things can get a little bit rabid. Obviously, when you actually are able to talk to people, you find that people are a lot more reasonable than maybe Twitter lets on. But anyway, so let me just start by saying that Brigham Young was indeed racist. Brigham Young was a Northerner from the early 1800s, and his views on race were perfectly typical of that era. I quote, and I'll quote here, quote, "I am not nor have ever been in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races. I am not nor ever have been in favor of making voters or jurors of Negroes, nor qualifying them to hold office, nor to intermarry with white people," end quote. Now, if you thought that was Brigham Young who said that, you're wrong. It was actually the great emancipator Abraham Lincoln. Sadly, essentially all of our ancestors were racist by modern standards until about World War II. But just because typical Northerners like Lincoln and Joseph Smith and Young held racist views did not mean they supported the chattel slavery of their day. So here's what's going to happen for everyone who's listening in tonight's debate. My opponent is going to, as he has, talk about the 1852 speech that was given, or give other quotes from Brigham Young in which he talks about a support of slavery. Almost all of these will be coming from that 1852 speech to the Utah legislature, where he said things like, quote, "We must believe in slavery," and, quote, "I'm a firm believer in slavery." But my opponent is he's going to ignore the political and historical context of that speech, and he will not mention a bunch of other quotes, like this one. Quote, this is Brigham Young speaking, "I am as much opposed to the principle of slavery as any man in the present usage of the term." He also said, quote, "If the government of the United States had the right to pass an anti-polygamy bill, they also had the right to pass a law that slaves should not be abused as they have been. For their abuse of that race, the whites will be cursed unless they repent. I should certainly be against the pro-slavery side of the question, for it was pro-slavery men that pointed the bayonet at me and my brethren in Missouri." Or to go on, another quote from Brigham Young is, "Restrictions of law and government make all of us servants. But human flesh to be dealt in as property is not consistent or compatible with the true principles of government. My own feelings are that no property can or should be recognized as existing in slaves, either Indian or African. No person can purchase them without their becoming as free, so far as natural rights are concerned, as persons of any other color." End quote. So the reality is that you are going to find quotes where Brigham Young seems to support slavery, and then you're going to find quotes where he seems to oppose it. So what are we to make of this? Well, first, essentially every pro-slavery quote my opponent will bring up tonight is from the context of that 1852 address to the Utah legislature during the time when he was trying to get support for statehood and needed the support of pro-slavery states. Now, talking about this racist speech in 1852, William Douglas wrote in the Latter-day Liberator a great article you all should read, and he says in it, quote, "Why else would Brigham, who was in fact supporting a law that would turn Utah into a de facto free territory, speak in any way that would seemingly endorse slavery at the exact same time? And why would he give a pro-slavery speech only a month after he publicly and completely denounced slavery altogether? The whole thing sounds like political theater. He understood that Utah would never be admitted as an official free territory. He knew Utah would never get the support of Southern politicians necessary to become a state if Utah openly denounced slavery. So he did something incredibly cagey. He supported a gradual emancipation law, but couched it in expressly racist and pro-slavery terms. End quote. Now, in 1852, Brigham said that he was pro-slavery, but was going to implement a law in Utah of a slave system, and I'm putting that in scare quotes, that looked nothing like the chattel slavery of his day. The Utah system abolished the category of slave where a person was property and ensured any indentured servant, which is what they now would be classified as, received recompense for their services. Things such as comfortable housing for them and their family. Recreation time was in the law. Health benefits for them and their family. Education was in the law for them and their family. And the bill ensured that they had the legal rights needed to protect them from any physical or sexual abuse. In addition, no slave could be brought to Utah unless the slave consented to come and assume their new role not as property, but as an indentured servant. And most importantly of all, remember this: any children born to these indentured servants in Utah were born free. Thus, that ensured the total end of slavery as an institution in Utah altogether. Is that what most people think of when they think of slavery? No, it's not. But it was what Brigham Young was talking about when he said slavery. He set it up in Utah following the example of other northern states to exist temporarily as a indentured service status so that they could transition slave families into full freedom. Now compare that to the de facto slavery of the impoverished white factory workers of the mid 1800s who had no health benefits, no education benefits, no housing benefits, and frequently were abused. The economic world of the 1850s was rough, and frankly, blacks had every right as human beings to full social and political equality. Brigham was wrong. He should have pushed for the full legal equality of black people. But this debate is not about if Brigham believed in racial equality. It's about if he supported slavery. And when most people think of slavery, they think of what went on in the South in the 17 and 1800s. And everything in the historical record indicates that Brigham was a typical Northerner of his day, like Abraham Lincoln and Joseph Smith, who opposed slavery, but he didn't support full political equality. If Brigham was a supporter of the chattel slavery of his day, why would he implement a program in Utah that dismantled it and ensured that it would never continue? Well, I can tell you why. It's because Brigham Young needed to appeal to the slave states in the 1850s for help in protecting the church. That's why he made the speech my opponent will quote tonight while ignoring the context. Brigham may have said he was pro-slavery, but what the Southerners did not realize was that the slavery he was talking about was something very different. My opponent tonight, like the Southerners, will only look at some quotes while ignoring others. And most importantly, he will ignore Brigham's actions. Brigham was using pro-slavery language, but his actions and policies were bringing an end to the practice. Yes, Brigham was racist, but he was not a supporter of the slavery of his day. Brigham was no different than Abraham Lincoln. Both were products of their time and held backwards and immoral views on race, but they both opposed slavery and created legislation to end the practice. And with that, I yield my time. Okay, so with that, you will now have 5 minutes to offer your rebuttal, and then I will offer my 5-minute rebuttal.
Perfect. Again, let me know if I am getting long-winded or if I cut out.
Yeah, no problem. I'll start the time now.
Great. Jacob, well said. I think I agree with just about everything that I think that you said there. And I think you're bringing out some really great points. I'm not somebody that subscribes to kind of a black and white position on, I think there's a lot of people that perhaps leave the church and they feel like, hey, look, everything's a closed case now. Anything that the church agrees with, I disagree with. I think you make some fantastic points, and I agree with all of them. I think that I think you're absolutely right. I think Brigham Young was probably just the realpolitik of his day required that for certain things. But also at the same time, though, too, I do think that Brigham Young, and he makes it very clear in that speech, he had an output, or sorry, he had an outlook on African Americans that was specific. He really did believe that they were cursed, and so as we talk about equality of races, I don't think that he believed in an equality of races. I do understand the underlying idea that that everybody was a child of God at some level, but I think that he definitely felt like the black race was cursed, and that was effectively their fault, and that justified their treatment. And I think that he states that pretty clearly. That is one thing I'd point out. The other thing that I'd point out, maybe to mention, that I think is worth mentioning, and I totally agree with you. I mentioned the same thing. I don't think the Brigham Young had any viewpoints that differed from Abraham Lincoln's, and I think he's definitely a product of his time. He was a Northerner. I think most people in that day and age probably had thoughts and ideas that today would get them canceled in a second. Uh, However, this is the piece that's important: is um, we expect more from Brigham Young, based on our faith, based on the theology. There is some expectation that perhaps as a prophet, he would have maybe more of insight, more insight, or kind of a more elevated, evolved perspective on things. And again, my point isn't necessarily to argue the veracity of the church, but I think that's part of the issue, and maybe that's part of the reason why people are so reactive to it. But I agree with you 100%, and at the same time too, I think I will say that I think Brigham Young accomplished a lot of things, and I think it would be a terrible tragedy to try to cancel him. Likewise, I think it'd be a tragedy to try to cancel Abraham Lincoln. However, I think that it's a true statement that he was racist. It's a true statement that he supported slavery, and I think that in some ways that is inconsistent with the claim of being a prophet, or maybe having a knowledge that we would expect from somebody that was in that role. That's not to say that he did not contribute greatly and in a lot of ways. And I think that that's probably an important distinction to make. And I think that's something that's very important to me too. I think that there's effectively, I think culture is very important. And I don't think all cultures are created equal. I think cultures evolve. I think people's and groups evolve. And I think there are some very highly evolved things that took place in Brigham Young's era. However, in the context of equality, and in the context of did he have divine insight? Some of those things would be kind of difficult to prove based on his record with this, in this particular situation. And I think there's sort of a similar issue, with not to get too far off topic, but the people bring up related to Joseph Smith and the wives, and some of those things. And those are issues that are important to people that are perhaps disaffected from the faith, because I think for them, they feel like, hey, these are very real reasons to struggle with some of these claims. And I think that it's important at times to give some grace for people that feel that way, because I think that it's a very just and fair position on people's parts to say, I don't think Brigham Young was a bad man, but at the same time too, I do struggle with faith in the church because of some of the things that he
1
subscribed
minute.
to, or possibly said. So if that makes sense, I think that that's essentially my position. I think Brigham Young did a lot of great things. Historically speaking, I think he's as interesting as they get. But personally, I think I have a hard time with the prophet claim, based on this treatment, particularly because I think it's inconsistent with the underlying idea of children of God and of agency. So I'll yield my time.
Perfect. All right. Thank you very much. All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop the timer here. I'm going to reset it. And now I will start it for myself. All righty. Well, first of all, thanks again. Obviously, this is a very friendly debate, and I appreciate what you said. But I do want to remind everyone who is listening that this is a debate not about if Brigham Young was a prophet. This is not a debate about if Brigham Young was a racist. I've already conceded that Brigham Young held racist views, and that's a big shift in the debate. This is a debate about whether or not Brigham Young supported slavery. And when people think of slavery, they think about what was going on in the 1800s in the South. That's what we think of when we think of slavery. And Brigham Young did not support that. He explicitly rejected that. And what he was willing to support was something that I still think is wrong. but it certainly was not slavery. When people say Brigham Young supported slavery, people have something in mind. And what they have in mind wasn't something where people were being guaranteed rights, such as that they couldn't be abused, that they had to consent to going to Utah, that they couldn't be split up from their families, that they had to receive education, health care, all these kinds of benefits that, frankly, in that era were much more generous than what was offered by the factory, the companies running the factories in England where Brigham had been. Now, regardless, that he was not offering them full political equality. Now, my opponent has rightly pointed out that, Brigham didn't believe in full equality. If we were having a debate tonight on did Brigham Young support full political equality with other races, I wouldn't be in this debate. I would run away from it. But that isn't what the debate is about. The debate is about if he supported the institution of slavery as most people think of that term. And the reality is he didn't. And not only that, he was instrumental in the creation of legislation that would end the practice. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is that all around the world, there's been slavery. And in the Western world, people had to figure out, how do we end slavery? Joseph Smith, in his presidential platform, wanted to sell the lands in the West and then use the money to purchase the freedom of the slaves. This is similar to what was done in other countries. Brigham's program was essentially a transition out of slavery by granting slaves to make them no longer property, to end the slave practice, to get rid of the title of slavery, to create an indentured servitude class, which had a whole bunch of rights. And if any abuse happened, they would immediately be freed. Blacks in this law specifically would be able to testify in court if there was ever any abuse. So, this was a whole new thing that Brigham was implementing. Now, why did Brigham? Now Brigham obviously believed in the curse of Cain. He believed in all of those sorts of false and wrong things. And he also recognized that in the Bible, at least you can say tolerates some form of servitude that we might call slavery. But biblical scholars will talk all about kind of, well, what was it that was actually practiced or referred to in the Bible? And Brigham was doing his best to essentially understand that and then to implement something that he believed was consistent with what the Bible would tolerate, at least temporarily in Utah. Now, another story that my opponent, I don't know if he's aware of, is the story of green flake. Now, there is rumor that green flake was given to Brigham as tithing, which is actually a dubious claim. However, what people don't say about green flake is that Brigham Young freed him. Okay, so Brigham Young, the great supporter of slavery, creates laws to end it, frees slaves. But yeah, you're right. In one speech in 1853, or at least in that speech specifically, he couches a bill that is very clearly going to end the practice of slavery, and he couches it in racist language to get Southern support. So if that is all you have to support the claim that Brigham Young supported the slavery of the 1800s, you're simply wrong. Like, that's just not what happened. And again, I just want to remind everyone, this is not a debate about if the church is true. This is not a debate about if Brigham was a prophet. This is not a debate about if Brigham was racist. The subject of the debate is if he was a supporter of slavery. And when people think of slavery, they think of what was going on in the South in the 1800s. And Brigham Young clearly did not support that. And my opponent has basically agreed. So essentially, at this point, the debate is over. But I do look forward to continuing it. So with that, I will yield my time. All right.
What's next, Jacob?
Okay, so next we have cross-examination. So in this round, what will happen is that you can ask me questions. So you'll have 4 minutes to ask me whatever questions you want. And then I'll respond to those questions. So basically, think of me as sitting on the witness stand and you're asking the questions. Sound good?
Sure.
Okay, you ready for me to start the timer?
Yeah.
Okay, time begins now.
So, Jacob, what was the adversary's plan?
To rob man of their agency.
To rob man of their agency and then do what effectively?
To essentially guarantee that none would be lost.
So he would take care of them, right? And would you agree that that was going to be through compulsion?
Yeah.
And so, what's the definition of slavery?
I would say the coerced labor of another and owner. I would say ownership of another by another human being.
Ownership of another by another, and if in ownership of someone by someone else, does that mean that their agency is restricted by that person completely?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
And does that,
if you're arguing that, do I think slavery is wrong? Like, yes, 100%.
did Brigham Young state that he believed in slavery?
Yeah, but it should be recognized what he was referring to as slavery was not the ownership of other human beings by other human beings, as he explicitly said that he was opposed to one human being owning another, which is very much in line with what our scriptures teach on the subject.
But he did believe that they would legally be owned by someone else, correct? And the law would protect that.
No. So there's a difference between indentured servitude and slavery. So chattel slavery, the word chattel means
So
property.
did Brigham Young say that he believed in indentured servitude, or did he say he believed in slavery?
He used the word slavery, but if you look at
Do
what
you
the
think that
context was, he wasn't talking
do
about
you think that
ownership.
do you think that he didn't understand the difference between those two things?
I think in the context of the 1852 speech, he probably was using the term slavery to appease the the the
That, that,
southern
that that's
politicians.
conjecture, though, right? Like there's no evidence that supports. I mean, that's just your own
Well,
personal hope, right?
the evidence is found in what the bill actually contained that he was supporting. He was calling it slavery, but what's interesting is that he got rid of the title of the bill, which originally said African slavery, and he changed it to an act in relation to servitude.
Yeah, you are correct, but I think he clearly states that he supports slavery in his speech. Although he does change the title of the bill, which is probably a politically expedient thing to do. He clearly states in that speech that he supports slavery. Correct. He doesn't say I support servitude. He says I support and believe in slavery.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he was doing that in order to appease the southern politicians.
Well, I mean that's what you think, right? But did he say that in his speech?
No, because if he said I'm doing this to appease the southern politicians, he probably wouldn't have got their support.
Sure. Well, why was he trying to appease the Southern politicians? I mean, are you sure he wasn't just trying to appease the saints? And I mean, the speech was to the legislature of Utah, correct?
Yeah, but everyone knew that this was a massively big political topic across the nation because the big debate in the 1850s was what the addition of new territories and states, how it would affect the power balance between slave states and free states.
Sure, sure. And your claim was that Utah wanted to be admitted to the Union, correct? And that's why he did it.
Yeah, absolutely.
When in what year did Utah get admitted to the Union?
Not until like the 1890s.
That's right. That was about 50 years later, right?
Yeah, but they were at that time they were looking to try and get at least territorial status, and regardless, Brigham was
And
real quick. Let
did
me answer the
Brigham Young
question.
just lose? He just lost control of Deseret, right? Didn't they just start? They had Deseret established, and they had to dissolve it just prior to that
Yeah,
speech.
shortly after the state of Deseret did have to be dissolved. With that said, we are at 4 minutes,
Okay,
so we'll wrap up with that
I
question.
yield.
You will get another 4 minutes. So
Right,
I
right.
now will get my 4 minutes real quick.
Sure.
So let me go ahead and get the thing set up. All right, and I'll start the time right now. Okay, so first, if Brigham Young supported slavery, then why would Brigham Young say the following? He said, quote, I am as much opposed to the principle of slavery as any man in the present usage of the term. Why would he say that?
I think that he, again, as you mentioned, he was politically adept. and I think he knew it was probably wise to speak in those terms to a degree. Also, I think that I think he also, as you mentioned, I think he was very opposed to the abuse of human beings. I think he was very opposed to people. You know, he mentions people being whipped and mistreated and physically harmed. I think he was definitely opposed to that, and that was probably the piece that he was trying to maybe debate. Although I don't think that he was trying to argue that people shouldn't be owned by other people.
Okay. So you say that he didn't think that people, or he thought it was okay for people to own other people.
Yeah, I believe that he
So
thought it was
if
okay. Yes,
that was the
slavery.
case, then why would he say this? Why would Brigham Young, if he thought that people should be owned by other people, why would he say human flesh to be dealt in as property is not consistent or compatible with the true principles of government?
I don't know why he'd say that if he also said that he believed in slavery.
So you agree there's a contradiction in the quotes. There's some where he says he supports slavery and some that says that he doesn't.
Yeah, and he definitely supported the ownership of people being something that was ingrained in the law.
Did the Utah law allow people to own other people?
Yeah, it permitted slavery. I mean, effectively, in substance over form, it was certainly ownership of other people. People controlled.
Can you bring your property across state lines in the
I, I,
1850s?
I guess it depends. I guess it depends. I mean, I don't know that you can bring all types of property across
Could
state
it
lines now.
would the Utah law allow people to bring their slaves into Utah if the slave didn't consent to continue their status as an indentured servant in Utah?
I don't know,
Um,
but I'm not sure that disproves whether or not it's property.
why would Brigham Young say that um, sorry, that no property can or should be recognized as existing in slaves, either Indian or African? Why would he say that if he believed that people could be property?
I'm speculating here, but I'm thinking he's speaking out of both sides of his mouth, probably, because in the law, he definitely treated those people like property, and he established laws that did that.
Okay.
So I think substance over form.
Does property have a right to testify in court?
I mean, if I own a boat, I'm not sure that it does.
Okay.
I'm not really sure that. I don't know if that's a defining characteristic.
Did the Utah law guarantee freedom for the children of the indentured servants?
You stated that was the case, and I
If that
believe you.
was the case, would it have ended slavery in Utah?
It's hard to say. I mean, I imagine it could have. I mean, slavery ended anyways. I think that there were a lot of ideas that were being tossed around to end slavery at that period of time. Could have, perhaps, but would those people that were slaves still be slaves throughout the period? I mean, I think it's wrong to keep people as slaves.
Okay, and with that, that's my time. So I will now reset the clock, and you'll have another 4 minutes to go after me. All right, time
Is this
starts now.
Jacob? Is this piece cross examination or just
Yeah,
are these
this is still
closing statements?
cross-examination where
Oh, okay.
we each get a total of 8 minutes. I'm going to stop the timer. We each get a total of 8 minutes, and those 8 minutes are broken up into two. So I get 4
Four
minutes,
and
you get
four.
4 minutes, I get 4 minutes, you get 4 minutes, kind of like that. So you'll get 4 minutes, and I'll get 4 more after that.
Gotcha.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and start the timer now.
Yeah. Jacob, is it contradictory for someone to believe in taking away a person's rights if they also believe in free agency?
Yes.
Is it contradictory to take away somebody's rights without their consent?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
If you're arguing, I mean, it is immoral to enslave other human beings, and it is, I would even say, it's immoral to have a system, any government system, that does not grant full equal rights. I just don't think we're arguing if he believed in full political equality.
Did Brigham Young use his political power to establish laws that supported, that protected, that created slavery in the state of Utah?
He created a system of temporary indentured servitude that would end the institution of slavery ultimately.
Now, when you say temporary indentured servitude, those slaves were going to be freed after a certain amount of time.
Their children would be freed, but they would continue.
Their children would, right? And
yes.
that's a key difference between slavery and indentured servitude. Typically, an indentured servant would serve for 6 or 7 years and know that they had, and likewise, an indentured servant probably made a decision which put him in that situation. Is that correct?
Yes. Now, here's the other thing was that no servant or no slave could be brought to Utah without them consenting to come and to take on that status. And so if they were coming, they would have consented at that point to do that. Do I think that that was sufficient? No. Full political equality is what should have been granted. However,
Jacob, if you were
real
in
quick, let me
Brigham
finish
Young,
answering the question just real quick.
I have a new question. I want to use my time.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
Jacob, if you were in Brigham Young's shoes, would you have granted full political equality?
Yes, 100%. 100%. 110%. And I would say, just real quick, he was doing what he could do at that time in the circumstances of what other states had done and what other nations had done to bring an end to slavery through a transitionary period out of slavery. This
Jacob,
isn't unprecedented what he did.
Is it reasonable to expect more from someone like Brigham Young, who so many people regard as being different than other men because he was a prophet? It would be.
Yeah. I think that I am disappointed, but I also recognize that the political context of that time and just his own racist views that he wasn't able to shake, I don't hold to prophetic infallibility. So therefore, I think that, he was doing the best that he could given who he was and the time that he lived in. And frankly, as you said, he basically him and Lincoln are kind of on the same page.
Jacob, do you think, is it fair for people to feel offended by what he did?
Yeah, that's fair.
And to maybe question his integrity because of it?
I think it's fair to question what he did, and with hindsight and with our own knowledge today of where we are, yes, to be very, very critical of it. But I'm always a little bit cautious because if you're going to throw him under the bus, you're going to have to throw Lincoln under the bus too.
Jacob, you ever read any arguments for why Lincoln should have been thrown under the bus? I know this is a tangent, but
yeah. Well, time's about to run out, but I will answer that question. Yes, yeah. And I think that there are legitimate debates to be had about Lincoln as well.
Yeah. No, so thank you. I appreciate you indulging me.
No problem. All right, let's go ahead and stop the timer here. All right, let me go here to get started, and we will start the timer right now. Okay. Did the Utah 1852 law abolish the slave class and replace it with an indentured servant class? Meaning, and when I say slave, I mean chattel slavery, where someone is actually their property and therefore has no rights.
I think we're mincing words a little bit. I don't know if it actually did something along those lines. I mean, I know that in Brigham Young's speech, he clearly uses the term slavery. I know that you've said that you feel like his usage of that word is different, but to me, that feels like doublespeak, like 1984 kind of stuff. But I'm not sure.
Okay. So what kind of rights were guaranteed by the 1852 law for these servants?
I am just speculating, but based on kind of the spirit of Brigham's words, I think that he was clearly trying to establish that the servants, the slaves, could not be physically abused. that they would have certain rights, and that people could be held accountable. Likewise, I think he was establishing, though, that those people would be property, and
What would happen? What would happen if those people were abused?
I mean, I imagine there's some kind of penalty within the law. I don't know the details or specifics, but it
Was
sounded like
it
the law
was
would
it
protect that.
was it that they would be set free?
I do not know that.
Okay. Were families allowed to be split up under the Utah law?
I don't know that either. I think it'd be great if they didn't.
Was education guaranteed for the servants under this law?
I think I do remember some mention of education.
Okay.
Particularly maybe in the Indian case, yeah.
Did the Saints, did Brigham have an incentive in 1852 to use racist language and to use the word slavery to gain support?
Yes, I think he probably did.
Okay. When Brigham used the word slavery, do you think he was referring to the chattel slavery of his day, meaning the chattel slavery, like what was going on in the South, or was he referring to something different?
I think he was referring to chattel slavery minus the physical abuse.
Okay. Under chattel slavery, could people be brought across state lines without their consent?
I do not know.
Okay. Did the Utah law allow slaves to be brought to Utah without their consent?
I think my understanding is no. Or perhaps it didn't let them leave the state without their consent or something along those lines.
Do politicians sometimes engage in political theater and speak hyperbolically?
Sometimes or all the time. Yeah, for sure. Yep.
Do you have any quotes from Brigham saying that he supported slavery outside of that speech from 1852?
I do not readily available, but I think that there are some. I think that there are some. But that's speculation. I think it's the case, but I don't have any readily available.
Okay, very cool. And with that, I'll yield my time. I got a little bit left, but I think that's enough. Okay, so I'm going to stop the timer, and then you now will have, let me just double check. It was 5 minutes for a closing statement, and then I'll give my closing statement, and then that will wrap things up. So are you ready for me to start the timer?
Sure. Yeah.
All right. Time will start now.
So I think in close, I mean, I still feel the same way. I believe that Brigham Young very clearly stated that he supported slavery. I don't think that he went out of his way to say that what he supported was indentured servitude. I think, and to all members' credit, Mormons' credit, Latter-day Saints' credit, I think Mormons believe in treating people with honor and dignity, and I think Brigham tried to bake that into the law. Although he did support the ownership of other people, I believe, and I think that his position was effectively the same position that in the church we teach is essentially the adversary's position, was the adversary's plan. It was pure compulsion. There were some nice things baked into it, some incentive, that kind of thing, but I think that it was justification for pure compulsion for slavery. The term slavery, if you look into it, the term slavery is actually kind of difficult to define, because I mean, there's so many different forms and degrees of compulsion and ownership of other people, or domestication of other people. But I think it's very clear that Brigham Young was believing that domestication of other people was absolutely fine. It wasn't an issue at all. I think that he also kind of went on to explain that he felt similarly about all the saints or all the people in the world. That people essentially, it was okay to make them all servants of some type, or that all people are effectively servants of God. So I think that he definitely supported slavery, and in some ways he believed in it deeply. And I think that, and part of the reason why I think that that's troubling is because I think that that's it's contradictory to the teachings of free agency. I think that you cannot from one side of your mouth explain that you believe in free agency, and from the other side of your mouth believe that it's okay to own people and to control them and to use compulsion to direct what they're doing for the private gain of an elite. Um, and I think that he definitely supported that. I think that there's probably some arguments to explain that there were good reasons why he said what he said or did what he did, but I think it's whitewashing, and I think it's sugarcoating. I think he makes it very clear in that speech that he's not just trying to bow to the powers that be. I think he's trying to state, what he believes, what's integral to his own personal belief system. And so I think that that's important to understand. It's not, and if you read the speech, it's clear. I mean, if you read the speech, he does not mince words, and he goes out of his way to make it very emphatic and clear that he believes in slavery. It's part of his theology. He definitely believes that blacks are different than whites, and it's not because, I mean, he says that it's because of choices that they made prior to this life, but it's not like an indentured servant makes a decision in this life and they sell themselves into slavery effectively for a period of time. But that's not what slaves do. It's pure force. I don't think that a belief system should create that type of an arrangement for another person. I believe in agency. I think that freedom's essential, and I know that. I mean, I think most people that are from this country believe that as well. And I know that we've got a checkered past, but at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's any good excuse for what took place or what happened. I think that's all I've got, Jacob. I'll yield my time.
Okay, perfect. All righty, let me go ahead and reset this. Okay, and then I will begin my time now. Okay, so just a reminder to everyone, tonight's debate, again, is not about if slavery was wrong. We obviously agree on that. It's not if Brigham Young was racist. We agree on that. He was racist. It's, the question was if Brigham Young supported slavery. And when people say, hey, does XYZ person support slavery? They have something in mind. And that something in mind is what was going on in the South and even in the North in the 17 and 1800s. Okay. And Brigham Young was a typical Northerner. Even my opponent agreed. He essentially was like Abraham Lincoln. These were people who opposed slavery. Okay. But they did not support full political equality of the races at all. Okay. So, but then my opponent seemed to have changed his arguments later in the debate, and he began to talk about how, no, well, Brigham Young actually did believe in chattel slavery. He just, didn't like the abuse. Now, I want you all to remember chattel, the word chattel, it means property slavery. It's basically where a human being is reduced to property. And when you are property, especially in the 1850s, you can do whatever you want with your property because it's your property. Brigham Young, Abraham Lincoln, Joseph Smith all opposed chattel slavery. And my opponent said that Brigham Young supported it. Yet my opponent I don't know, he just ignores or just is like, well, I don't think Brigham Young is being honest when he says that that human flesh to be dealt with, this is what Brigham said, human flesh to be dealt in as property is not consistent or compatible with the true principles of government. That's Brigham Young. Brigham Young, again, my own feelings are that no property can or should be recognized as existing in slaves, either Indian or African. How much more clear could he be? Now he says, but he did say he believed in slavery. Again, he's not recognizing that he admitted that politicians engage in political theater and that Brigham might have been using wordplay in that one speech in 1852 to try and gain support. Now, if Brigham Young, I'm unaware also of any quotes, maybe they exist outside of the 1852 speech, but in 1852, my opponent admitted that Brigham had an incentive to, appeal to the southern states. And so he would use this racist slavery language to try and get them on his side. And like the Southerners took the bait just like my opponent did. But if you actually look at the legislation, it dismantles slavery and actually would end it. It was a transitionary program, very similar to what other northern states had done in order to end slavery. So the idea that Brigham Young supported chattel slavery is simply not supported by the historic record. And the anomaly in it is the 1852 speech, in which Brigham Young had a political incentive to try and get these southern states on his side, even though he did say that I am as much opposed to the principles of slavery as any man in the present usage of the term. That is critical. In addition, he had no love for the Southerners because they were the ones who had driven his people out of Missouri. Now, my opponent also brought up points about, what about respecting Brigham Young? Those simply are out, or don't we expect more to prophets or the infallibility or the plan of salvation? Yeah, we all agree. Slavery is wrong. It's a great evil. It's one of the greatest evils of all time. And Brigham Young was doing what he could within the context that he could to actually end the practice. Now, he did hold racist views still, and he did believe that it could be justified under certain conditions. And frankly, that was wrong. But we should remember that in Doctrine and Covenants 101:79, it says, therefore, it is not right that any man should be in bondage one to another. King Benjamin talked about that he did not suffer that ye should make slaves of one another to his people. And my opponent, I'm very glad he mentioned this because he does see it. If there was an error, it was Brigham Young's error. It was not the error of the gospel of Jesus Christ. In the Book of Mormon, it says that God denieth none to come unto him, black or white, bond or free, male or female. Okay? The church and the gospel of Jesus Christ is anti-slavery. If Brigham Young ever supported any of it, it was wrong, but he did not support the slavery of his day. And with that, that's my time. All righty. Well, thank you so much, Darth, for coming on and doing this debate. I want to invite you, if you want to do a follow-up on this debate. I have to roll right now, but send me an email, and maybe we can have a conversation on my channel and kind of review our debate. Obviously, debates are kind of like a slug match, and you want to win, and so maybe we can delve more into some of the nuances. But
no, I appreciate it as well, Jacob. Thank you. I appreciate you putting it together and being willing
for doing this. And for anyone else who's interested in maybe doing one of these kinds of debates on a particular subject, I'm very open to them. I enjoy them very much. I find the format to be good. So anyone can feel free to message me if you're interested in debating particular topics, or if you want to debate someone else, and I can act as the host of the debate. So anyway, thank you all for joining us this evening. We'll go ahead and sign off. Thank you.
Have a great night.
Bye-bye. So do you enjoy the content here on Thoughtful Faith? If so, be sure to hit the notification bell. This ensures that our new videos show up on your feed. Also, be sure to check out our Facebook group called Thoughtful Saints, where myself and others discuss the sorts of topics found on this channel. And lastly, if you think other people would benefit from this video, please be sure to share it.